Hi, I'm Garnbreak1, and this is Midgardia's cool crowdfunding show. I'm here today with Thomas from Alberta Regional Rail. How's it going?
I'm doing good, thanks, Gum. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well myself. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about, well, Alberta Regional Rail?
Well, my name is Thomas Fryer. I'm a civil structural engineer by profession, and I currently work as a project engineer. My work entails coordinating consultants in the design of projects and organizing contractors during the construction of projects. Along the way, I write scopes of work, produce cost estimates, develop schedules, and review design and construction progress, amongst many other important elements. I am the founder of Alberta Regional Rail. I was working on a project in downtown Calgary over 10 years ago that overlooked the Canadian Pacific Main Line and saw the potential for the establishment of regional passenger rail in Alberta. The railroad is a foundational part of Canada's settler history. In many cases, the railroads predate highways and roads. Alberta Regional Rail is set up as a multi-phase plan for the introduction of passenger rail services in the Calgary-Edmonton corridor, connecting all the communities, towns, and cities, and the development and enhancement of this corridor, increasing capacity, speed, frequency, and safety of not just passenger services, but also freight movements, creating an integrated transportation system by constructing stations in urban areas through transit-oriented developments. Transit-oriented developments were designed in collaboration with the municipal authority to ensure connections with the local transportation infrastructure, that residential and commercial needs are met, and that the creation adheres to the long-term plan and vision of the municipality. Our aim is to use freight-compatible, CFR-compliant rolling stock, equipment that is in use across North America and that is available to purchase off the shelf or used as equipment that could be refurbished to our needs, and that meets the crashworthiness standard of 800,000 pounds static and loading.
Right on, right on. And like you said, you know, rail was absolutely vital to the founding of pretty much all of Canada. Like, if you look at any, historical pictures, there are passenger trains like most people, got between cities with them. Up until the 80s, we had actual passenger service, and now we don't. And it sucks.
The interesting thing about the corridor is that the towns are equidistant between each other, and they
Huh.
were set up because of the steam trains. So the steam trains had to stop in certain locations to take on more water, and that has developed the towns within the corridor.
Interesting. I actually didn't know that. And yeah, like you said, trains used to run like all the way deep into cities. Like you used to be able to take the Dayliner up to basically the legislature building up in Edmonton, like right in the downtown core there. You can't really do that with most other means of transportation without suffering through the horrible gridlock.
Yeah, the railways were created a lot of the towns and cities, and that's how people traveled back in the 1800s and the early 1900s. It was rail that enabled people to travel to different areas. When we look at the Banff National Park, in the early days of Banff National Park, the people would catch the train from Ontario and Quebec all the way to the hotels, and that's why the hotels are in those locations. The railway took the tourists to those hotels. A similar thing can be done in the modern era. You may not catch a train all the way across Canada to go and stay in a hotel in Banff, but Toronto has public transport to Toronto Pearson International Airport, from where you could catch a plane, and fly into Calgary, and you should be able to then catch a train or public transit into Banff National Park, and so you would not need to have or even hire a car.
Yeah, it's ridiculous that you need to rent a car like after traveling all that way. So I noticed that your website talks about regional rail as opposed to high speed rail, which is the big shiny fancy technology in the news. Can you tell me about the differences?
High speed rail is the pinnacle of passenger rail services. It is the ultimate goal of all passenger rail entities, is because we want to go faster, because that means that we get there quicker. And in economic theory, towns become closer together because distance, as well as being measured as a lineal distance, can also be measured in time as well. So regional rail is more the start point. So it's easy to set up a regional rail because you're not so dependent on speed. It's more connecting people and getting access. The faster you travel, the more expensive it becomes. And it's a matter of what is viable in today's economic climate and what is available to do.
Right. So regional rail would be a starting point, and 20 or so years from now, we may end up with like express services between the major cities running at the high speed rail for speeds. Is that correct?
Yes, so as I said, Alberta Regional Rail is a multi-phase plan. So the initial plan is to just get something going, just get either not everywhere. It's doubtful that we'll ever be able to connect all the communities right in the first year, but we may be able to connect half a dozen, 6 to 10 communities out of the 20 within the corridor. And then over time, you enhance and you develop and you increase the capacity and you can increase the speed to enable ultimately with a twin Varroa line along the Canadian Pacific corridor that would enable hopefully speeds of up to 200 kilometers an hour. Once you start getting above that, the track geometry becomes difficult in that you need greater curve radiuses and less lower slope gradients. So therefore, for high-speed rail, for true high-speed rail, you need a completely new right of way. You cannot justify a new right of way without having an existing base with which to determine your calculations. So back in when I started this, everyone was talking about high-speed rail. And one of the transportation managers, the old transportation manager in Calgary at the time, made a comment to the committee that was researching this, and that we have LRT in the cities. But then to develop high-speed rail between the cities is taking a step beyond. And really, we should be concentrating on an intermediate step. And the intermediate step is regional rail. So we should build regional rail first, enable and improve out the ridership numbers that would enable in later years to develop and build high-speed rail.
Right. Absolutely. You don't really want to put all your eggs in one basket, basically.
A lot of the studies that have been done to date, and high-speed rail, you've got to remember, has been studied in Alberta, and I'm just quoting, this is just Alberta research, since the late 70s.
Wow.
So high-speed rail was being researched before the Dayliner was axed.
That's brutal.
But in every single case, they could never justify the demand. The cost exceeded the demand. There was never the basis for it. And when you look at the general high-speed rail across the world, there's only a few lines that are actually economically viable. And those connect populations with tens of millions of people.
Right.
You can say the Paris to Lyon line. Paris has an area population of over 20 million people. And Lyon has an area population, and if you include Marseille in that, of another 10 million people. The same goes in Japan, the Shinkansen, Tokyo to Nagoya. Again, you're looking at a population area of over 30 million people. That's more than the population of Canada. So that makes high-speed rail is not viable at this point. But with the implementation of regional rail, you can increase the population growth and enable the demand for high-speed rail. So
Yeah.
it is a step. The first step to high-speed rail is regional rail. And one of our partners, one of our aiding members on this entity used to be the chief economist for SNCF. And he says the same thing. High-speed rail is the ultimate goal. Yes, we all strive in the rail industry for high-speed rail. High-speed rail is the ultimate goal. It's the pinnacle of the rail industry. But it's not the start point. It's the end. The ultimate goal, the end point is high-speed rail. The start is regional rail. And you could say that in the history of rail in Europe. They had regional rail lines, and then they wanted to connect the largest urban areas quicker. And that meant introducing express services and then introducing and building high-speed rail corridors.
And of course, nowhere in this progression is the hyperpods that so many people want to spend a bunch of money on building.
The Hyperloop is it's interesting. I'm dissing as an engineer, as a effective science basis. It's an interesting proposition, and I looked at this and I went through it and I did a little write up of it. And what I call it is it's an aircraft inside a submarine propelled by maglev. So and that's what it is. And we build airplanes. We know how to build an airplane. We build submarines. We know how to build submarines, and that's enough. We know how much it costs and what's involved and what the material needs to be. And we have maglev. There are maglev operations around the world, mainly in China and Asia, and they exist. But where I stumble on this whole concept is cost. It's going to cost. There is a true maglev line in Japan, and it cost, if it was to be installed in Alberta, it would cost over $60 billion.
Wow.
That's the technology, and it doesn't. Railway needs a certain amount of the maximum energy to accelerate. Once it's got to its speed, it needs very little power to maintain its speed. When you look at linear motors, they need constant power throughout their entire length and speed. So the power consumption, and this has actually been studied, this is our friend from SNCF and Deutsche Bahn actually researched this. They wrote up a couple of papers on it, and it was so uneconomical that they did their first theory and was just like, yeah, this isn't going to work between France and Germany. We're going to stick with SNCF, with the TGV and the ICE.
Right.
So it's an interesting concept, and there is a lot of good technology in there, but it's more feasible for somewhere like Washington to New York, or supplementing an existing high-speed rail corridor, say in Japan, or in Asia, in China, something that's a high density line. That's where it's needed because the costs are incredibly excessive, and the requirements of it is astronomical. Alberta can't afford it. It just can't. Not even Toronto to Montreal. It's not even feasible there.
Yeah, and we're more sparsely populated out here than there.
We have fewer people in Alberta than they have in the Greater Toronto area.
Yeah. And that's like even so, we have twice the population that we did when the Dayliner was cut. So, it's getting better, but still not there.
The thing with the Dayliner is actually very interesting when you look at the history of it. The reason, the main reason people say is that not many people use the Dayliner. And then you look into, well, okay, why did people stop using the Dayliner? Well, it became unreliable. So that's why people stopped using it, was because in a car they could take 4, maybe 5 hours to drive back in those times. And the Dayliner, although it was advertised as being less than 4 hours, would frequently take longer. Well, why would it frequently take longer? Well, because people kept on crashing into it. And people say, oh, yes, no, the train hit the car. No, 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 the car hit the train. The train cannot move. It can only go backwards and forwards. It can't move side to side. It can't stop on a dime. The car crashed into the train. And that's once the car crashes into a train, that takes the train out of service. And therefore, people have to get off and they catch a bus, and that makes it unreliable. There was never a cent of investment made into that service over its entirety of operation. An easy fix for some of those issues would have been to identify the problem grade crossings where people were either oblivious or maybe an education program to the population to say, look, when you see a grade crossing, just be aware, be aware. Or they could have spent some money and grade separated them just by putting a simple bridge over the railway line. So
Right.
there's a lot of things that have been done. And that's what I've costed out, is that our ultimate goal, our ultimate end point with doubling the line isn't just doubling the line, it's also adding over 40 road over rail bridges, improving the grade crossings of over 50 grade crossings in the corridor, because there's some places where you cannot put road over the railway line. You take places like Didsbury that want to maintain their historical downtown area for movie sets and everything. So you can't put a road or a big modern bridge in there. You need to maintain the grade crossings as they are, but you want to make them better. And it's very simple to actually make some of these grade crossings better. And by making it better, you also enable whistle sensation. Frequent arguments against the rail is that they're noisy. The trains are always blaring their horn. Well, if you improve the grade crossings, then you could end up with whistle cessation, which means that the trains don't need to blare their horn through the town, and therefore the residents can get a nice, decent night's sleep through the night.
Right.
There's a lot of little things that could be done to make it better, but there is no political incentive to make it better, I find. There's a lot of things that could easily be done. There's a lot of money out there, but there's no understanding that everybody thinks, all right, we've got to redo everything. No, you don't need to redo everything. Why we're using the CP main line, it exists, it is there. It is maintained to a high standard because it transports petrochemicals. So it's at a very high standard. There's just a few little things that you need to do. Put in a couple of bridges and increase the number of turnouts so you can increase the capacity and the frequency of the services. Put more trains on there. There's a lot of little things that can be done. And yes, they cost much. I mean, all infrastructure has a cost. I mean, people say, oh yeah, I want to just build a road. It's so much cheaper to build a road. So I'm an engineer, done the estimate. The Stony Trail, the Calgary Ring Road, costs about $5 million per lane. And I want to emphasize that per lane. $5 million per kilometer, per lane kilometer.
Wow.
A twin line would cost about 7 million a kilometer. Oh, well, the road's cheaper. Well, no, a lane of highway is cheaper, but a road is 2 lanes. So a road is actually $10 million a kilometer, whereas a twin railway line is 7. But the equivalency of a twin railway line is a greater than 8-lane highway. So
Right.
a road is not cheaper because the railway can take more. It can carry more goods. Passenger rail doesn't take cars off the road. It can also take trucks off the road. I said we want to enhance the rail corridor, which means we can put more freight. And there's different ways of putting freight on the railway line. It doesn't have to be a gondola and a boxcar. There's a number of different things that can be done and improve, not just taking cars off the road and just reducing emissions that way. There's also like hydrogen fuel cells. They're way more efficient on a mass transit application. A hydrogen fuel cell car still needs a lot of power. The more people you can carry, the less power per person that you need, and therefore the more efficient it becomes. So we'd introduce hydrogen fuel cell trains in the corridor, really reduce the emissions of Alberta. And it's a simple thing to do. It's not going to cost billions of dollars to do carbon capture and storage. It's a very simple thing of just putting a couple of bridges on the railway line, increasing the trackage to increase the capacity and increase the speed. And to encourage people to, well, not really encourage people to get out of their cars. What we found through our research is that 30% of Albertans cannot drive due to age or health condition and financial situation. That's a significant number of people that cannot drive. They don't have a license. They can't get a license because their health is in such poor state, or they can't even afford to buy a car. And then you also have a significant number of people that don't want to drive. And one way, I'm lucky that I live in Calgary, but I don't drive downtown. Why would I drive downtown? I don't want to have the stress of driving. I can afford to buy a car. I run a car. I have a car. I'm not advocating we ban all cars, but I don't like driving downtown and I don't want to drive downtown. And if there was a possibility that I could go to Edmonton without having to drive, I'd take that. Of course I would. It means I don't have the stress of driving.
Yeah, for like 3 solid hours. It's not
Yeah,
great. I've done that drive. It sucks.
I've done it several times. My partner's family are from Edmonton, so I've driven it several times, and uh, it's a bit of a selfish thing. I want to train because I don't want to drive. So I'm selfish. But there's a lot of people that don't want to drive either. I've spoken to a number of people when we've done presentations through the corridor. There's a lot of people that don't want to drive. It's not that they cannot drive, they don't want to drive.
Yeah, I've talked to people in important skilled professions in some rural areas. They live in Edmonton, they drive out to wherever, and they're thinking of moving somewhere else because driving an hour in the middle of winter sucks and is not worth it for the pay they make. If they could take a train out to whatever small town they work in, as insert skilled profession here, um, that would actually that would probably help the various small towns a lot because we're gonna lose people over the weather and the drive.
Well, that's the other thing that when we did the presentations to council, so I'm going to read off a thing. Passenger rail can promote alternate living and employment choices for residents. The young would no longer feel the need to leave in order to work in the big city, and those that are older or that have health conditions could also stay in their communities as their medical appointment would only be a short train ride away. It's one of the things that came up when we presented to Wetaskiwin City Council. The presentation before us was about mental health and the mental health crisis in Wetaskiwin. And one item that was brought up was that there is no mental health facility in Wetaskiwin. And if somebody is undergoing a mental health crisis, they have to go to Edmonton. How would you get somebody to Edmonton who is undergoing a mental health crisis? And their only option was to put somebody in a taxi and put them on their way at the cost of hundreds of dollars. So it's there to every argument, to every issue that we face in the world, it's ultimately that passenger rail is the answer. If you want to see community decline in the rural areas, then carry on forcing people to drive, because those that can't have no option but to move, to leave their communities. But if you put in passenger rail, it means those people can stay. They can stay with their families. The young don't have to leave. You don't have the young drain out of the rural communities. The old people won't feel isolated anymore because they can easily just jump on a train and go and see their family. People that do actually want to move into the city because they don't want a long commute can just hop on a train and go back to their community and see their old family and their old friends. There are a lot of benefits, and I could spend hours talking about the various benefits of passenger rail, and there's a broad spectrum from the environmental, economic, and social.
Absolutely. Why hydrogen over electrification for the rail system?
Density is a simple answer. Um, the electrification, well, all trains are electric, apart from steam trains. Even the Canadian Pacific locomotives, they're actually electric. They have a diesel generator that generates electricity that goes to the traction motors, and the traction motors are electric. It's not a direct drive. It's not like your car or a bus or a truck. The engine does not drive the wheels. The engines generate electricity, and electricity drives the wheels. So all trains are electric at the end of the day. But in order to make it the overhead electric is where it becomes cost disadvantageous. And if you have a high frequency and a high capacity line, does overhead electrification really justify itself? For more regional, for less frequent service, everybody uses diesel at the moment as the generation, but a number of different things can be used. So you can go into natural gas, compressed natural gas, or you can go into hydrogen or battery as well. There's a number of different things that can be done. And that's, I think, one thing that would be good to do for Alberta Regional Rail is that there's all this stuff that can be done. When I first did this, people were talking about, well, you can use natural gas. Let's just use compressed natural gas. And it's very easy. We have plenty of natural gas in Alberta. Very easy to implement, and the engines exist as well. They are manufactured. So it's not a leap of the imagination to repower an old locomotive into a natural gas engine. And then you take the next step further. Well, we produce thousands of tons of hydrogen a day in Alberta. Hydrogen is manufactured by the petrochemical industry. So it exists. We have that infrastructure. And hydrogen fuel cell exists. We have hydrogen fuel cells. So again, we can take an old locomotive, take out the power plant, and put in hydrogen fuel cells. And we can show that. And that's what CP Rail have done, is that they took an old locomotive and they repowered it with hydrogen fuel cells, and they're currently operating it up and down the corridor, pulling freight trains.
Huh.
And we've spoken to them, and the power requirements or the power production from the hydrogen fuel cell is just about sufficient for what they do. But if they tried to make it bigger, it would be technically challenging. Like I said, not difficult. It becomes you just need a bigger platform, but passenger rail is a lot lighter. So hydrogen fuel cells are actually ideally suited to passenger rail. So it's something that we'd love to do, but we need to have the line first. We need to get the political buy-in. We need to get the community buy-in as well, because the politicians will do what the community tells them to do, effectively at the end of the day. So if we want to see hydrogen fuel cell passenger trains running on the Calgary-Edmonton corridor, we can make that happen. But we need to get on, and our aim is we have a plan to implement that. We just need people to get behind us.
Right on. Uh, I have one last question, and it is a major one. How are you going to deal with the bane of Via Rail's existence, the fact that the freight companies own the tracks and take priority?
There's a number of different ways that you can operate a passenger rail service. And our discussions with CP, their main hurdle, their main sticking point is conflict with freight movements. But then there's a number of different ways that can be got around that. So they currently have a capacity on their line of 32 trains per day. And that's basically set up by the spacing and the number of grade crossing points, passing points on their track. Passing point is approximately every 16 kilometers. So that allows 32 trains a day. If you twin the track, doesn't necessarily mean that you're doubling the capacity. Because if you said that, you're effectively saying, well, there can only be a train every 45 minutes. Because that's what there is at the moment. There's that one passing point. So if you twin the track, it's not 45 minutes. You could be half an hour. Well, actually, half an hour is quite a long time. It could be 15 minutes. Yeah, 15 minutes sounds about right. I mean, a freight train takes about 2 minutes to cross a grade crossing. 2.5 minutes. But if it takes 2.5 minutes to cross a grade crossing, surely it can be every 10 minutes. A train every 10 minutes on a twin track is equivalent to over 800 trains a day. A twin rubber line doesn't double the capacity of a single track line. It almost gets it by 8, 9 times the capacity. So again, just doing a simple thing of twinning the track, you can improve the number of trains, you can increase the capacity, and you can increase the frequency. And by getting rid of the grade crossings, you can increase the speed. That is all beneficial to the freight railroad. They're not against passenger trains. They just want to make sure that there are no conflicts with their freight services. And that's their main point of contention. But by investing in the infrastructure, we can make passenger rail happen very simply.
Excellent. Yeah, I
As
mean,
the Via Rail doesn't, because they have never invested in any of their lines. All they do is operate the track. There's no investment. Only now, with the concept of high frequency rail that they're employing in Ontario and Quebec, are they actually starting to invest in the infrastructure to eliminate the grade crossings, to twin the track, to add additional passing points, to increase the frequency and capacity of the trains.
right.
And that's all to the day line again. There was never a cent was put into the investment of the day line. So there was no means to grow it. There was no means to make it safer, to make it better. And there's very simple ways of making it better, just by investing in the infrastructure, building a bit more trackage, putting some road bridges over the railway lines, make it safer, more reliable.
Absolutely. I mean, heck, that's pretty convincing. Are there any other points you'd like to bring up while you're here?
No, none I can think of right now. It's really, the discussion is longer, and there's a whole different other aspects to it. We could talk about precision railroading, like time slots. There's a number of different conflicts and challenges to overcome. I mean, it's not going to be easy. I sometimes make it sound easier than it actually is, but there's a lot of big challenges. I would say that we have a 10, a 2, a 5, a 10, and 20-year plan. It would take 2 years to implement some sort of passenger service, and it would take 5 years to get new trains, and it would take 10 years to build out the corridor to fully twin track. And then it would be about 20 years before we started to start expanding into other areas of Alberta, then down to Lethbridge and onto Medicine Hat, out to Lloydminster from Edmonton and out to Jasper as well, and out to Banff. So it's not a quick thing. It's not going to happen overnight. There's a number of things that have to be done in a sense. 2 years. It would be, if we got the go ahead and the funding to start tomorrow, we wouldn't be able to put passenger rail services in place for 2 years because it would take 2 years to build out some of the infrastructure.
Right.
And it's about 5 years to get a new train, to get the new Siemens chargers, and the equipment that the rolling stock that VIA uses. It would take about 5 years to get that operational. So it's
It's
not
a
easy.
process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a process.
Well, the best time to start a passenger rail line is 20 years ago, and the second best time is today.
Yeah, Dayliner should never have been allowed to fail. Really.
Yeah. Yeah, the pictures of that whole thing are wonderful. Anyway, Thomas, thank you for coming on. And for those of you watching, there is a link to Alberta Regional Rail's website in the comments below. Please go check that out. If you live in Alberta, please politely inform your local politicians if you support the project. And yeah, here's hoping that we can have a better connected and healthier Alberta in the future.
Thank you, Gum.
Have a good one.